Good morning. Good morning. I'm the Director of International Organizations here in the Austrian Foreign Ministry. Excellencies, dear guests, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to the Alois Mock-Saal of the Austrian Foreign Ministry. With today's 49th edition of the IPI Vienna Seminar, we continue a long tradition of close cooperation between the Austrian Federal Ministry for Europe Integration and Foreign Affairs, the International Peace Institute, and the Austrian Ministry of Defense. I thank Adam Lupel, Vice President of the International Peace Institute, and his teams in New York and Vienna for their always pleasant and focused cooperation, their flexibility, and strong input in terms of content. I also thank the Ministry of Defense, especially Daniela Scheibelhofer and Robert Fritz, and I would like to extend a special thank you to the OSCE Chairmanship in Office, as well as to the Ban Ki-moon Center for their assistance in preparing this seminar. And of course, I want to thank my team. And here we have Maximilian Gorke and Matthias Schuster, and I think Elisabeth Marschank. Thank you very much. Dear guests, for this seminar, 3 elements were of particular importance to us. First, in the context of the 40th anniversary of the Vienna International Center, which we celebrated 2 weeks ago with Secretary General Antonio Guterres, we wanted to emphasize the important work of the United Nations in Vienna with its strong focus on prevention. I just mentioned a few examples: crime prevention, criminal justice, fight against organized crime, against corruption, money laundering, terrorism, against trafficking in persons, cybercrime, and the list goes on. And I wish to add the Vienna-based organizations and programs significantly contribute to the implementation of the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. Austria is proud to host this 3rd of 4 United Nations headquarters worldwide, and another around 40 organizations, including, of course, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The second element, which was of major importance to us when we prepared this seminar, Austria is strongly committed to an effective multilateralism. And we do hope that this seminar will make a strong contribution to that. Geopolitical developments, unilateralism, the disregard for international rules and common values are alarming. It has become too obvious. A functioning multilateralism is not a matter of course. We have to work hard in order to preserve, protect, and further strengthen our rules-based international order, our multilateral mechanisms, with the United Nations at the center. Let me be more specific. We will always need clean breathing air, clean drinking water, healthy oceans, energy for all. We cannot do without non-proliferation and arms control. Respect for the rule of law, for human rights, good governance, sustainable development are of the essence. And of course, a safe life, a life in security for all of us. And in the coming years, that is for sure, other globally relevant issues will be added to our to-do list, issues we can't even imagine today. And here comes the third element and main focus of this seminar. In order to manage, we need to effectively include young people as agents of prevention and change, as important contributors to an effective multilateralism. The introduction to the program in front of you points it out, and there is no doubt. Young people are key to uphold a culture of prevention based on our common values. And I just want to mention Greta Thunberg is probably one of the best examples. She was here 2 weeks ago in Vienna for the Austrian Global World Summit. With this, I welcome all of you, and in particular the keynote speaker and the speakers on today's panels. I'm sure we will have interesting discussions and conclusions of interesting for all of you, for the United Nations, the OSCE, and the many stakeholders, especially also for the young people who will definitely contribute to an effective multilateralism for prevention and change. I now want to introduce Adam Luppel, the Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the International Peace Institute. He is responsible for Development IPI's long-term research agenda and for overseeing management and coordination among IPI's offices. And of course, we have been cooperating with you, Adam, for many, many years. It's a pleasure to have you back in Vienna, and you have the floor. Please.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Ambassador Preudel. Part of me, after listening to your remarks and then looking at mine, part of me would like to just say I concur and be done. It was really fantastic. But Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, good morning to you all, and welcome to the 49th Annual Vienna Seminar. It's an extraordinary long-term partnership, and so I'd like to say thank you again to our partners, the Federal Ministry of Europe Integration and Foreign Affairs and the Federal Ministry of Defense for their partnership along the way. It's really wonderful to be back in this extraordinary hall. It's sometimes perhaps hard to pay attention to the speakers because I just want to look at the beautiful ceiling. This hall named after Alois Mock, who as Foreign Minister helped to bring Austria into the European Union. Alois Mock recognized, as I think we all do, the importance of Vienna as an international capital. So this year's seminar, as was mentioned, serves to mark the 40th anniversary of the United Nations Vienna International Center. And during that time, that 40 years, the space for international organizations in Vienna has only grown in significance and in size. As I don't need to remind any of you, you know the city serves not only as UN headquarters for the UN Organization on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, the UN Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, but also home to the OSCE and OPEC, among other important institutions. IPI itself has a long history here in Vienna, going back to our founding in 1970. It is no coincidence that the Vienna Seminar goes back to that same time. The Vienna Seminar was actually our founding program. So the 40th anniversary of the UN in Vienna provides an opportunity to reflect upon the contributions of the Vienna-based organizations, as well as to examine their role in moving forward to address the fundamental issues of our times, some of which Ambassador Preudel mentioned. As Secretary General Guterres noted in his speech commemorating the VIC's anniversary last month, Vienna has hosted many milestones of international cooperation, including the adoption of the Vienna Declaration on Human Rights and major conventions on transnational organized crime and drugs. However, we must recognize that we live at a time when such international cooperation is under stress. Conflicts in Afghanistan, Libya, Mali, South Sudan, Syria, Ukraine, Yemen, and elsewhere challenge international actors to provide positive responses. Meanwhile, challenges to global and regional power balances are heightening tensions and fueling anxiety about the erosion of the international rule-based order, from arms control regimes to human rights to free trade. We must find solutions. We must chart a path forward. The problems will not wait. To do that, we must work in partnership with governments, international organizations, civil society, the private sector, and others. And we must do it with the participation of those that have the greatest stake in the future, young people. An estimated 1.8 billion people globally are between the ages of 10 and 24, and nearly 1 in 4 of them are affected by violence or armed conflict. Children and adolescents make up the majority of the population in 48 of the world's least developed countries. In the past, too often, conversations around youth have focused on these growing numbers of youth as a problem, a security risk that needed to be mitigated. Either that or youth conversations have been framed around the idea that youth are a mere precious resource for the future that needs to be protected. But what has become clear by the energetic participation of young people around the world on a whole host of issues, Ambassador mentioned Greta Thunberg climate action, is that young people do not simply represent the future, they are the present. They are showing leadership on many issues of fundamental concern, not as part of a problem for older people to solve, they are themselves actively part of the solution. Young people are engaged in creative ways in preventing violence, sustaining peace, combating climate change, and promoting sustainable development around the world. How to partner with young people in this endeavor is our task and our topic of discussion today. To start us off, I am very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, a young leader in his own right. Samuel Goda is Special Representative of the OSCE Chairmanship in Office on Youth and Security. He was appointed as OSCE Special Representative by Italy in 2018. Together with his colleagues, he represents a youth voice within the OSCE and advises the chairperson in office on youth policy issues. He's also a Vice Dean for Development in the Faculty of International Relations, University of Economics in Bratislava, where he also works as a focal point for students' initiatives at the faculty. And for the last 5 years, he has been working for the oldest Slovak foreign policy think tank, the Slovak Foreign Policy Association, SFPA. With all that experience for a relatively young man, we are grateful to have the opportunity to hear from him. Please join me in welcoming to the floor Samuel Goda. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adam, for the introduction. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here and very honored in this 49th IPI Vienna Seminar. I would say this 49 sounds like a tradition, which here in Vienna must be appreciated very much. And while I was doing my homework and preparing the speaking points and the message I was thinking it's important to deliver, I was trying to check more about the IPI, even though I know IPI for a long time, but I found out that this is not the first time that the IPI is organizing an event dedicated to youth, peace, and security. And basically, you are one of those few institutions that is bringing bright minds, practitioners, and observers together on youth, peace, and security since 2015, when the UN Security Council resolution on youth, peace, and security was adopted. So thank you for that, and that's very much appreciated. However, many things have changed since 2015, both in Vienna and in New York. This acknowledgement of the United Nations Security Council resolution on youth, peace, and security has been echoed also in here in Vienna within the OSCE. Actually, it was almost a year ago when there was another resolution adopted in New York, and since 2014 we have the Basel Declaration within the OSCE, 2015 Belgrade Declaration, and last year we adopted Milan Declaration on youth and security and the contribution of young people to peace and security within the OSCE. So when it comes to kind of a framework, I would say this is pretty rich. This year, Slovakia has identified its third priority to engage for safer, better, and more secure future together with youth. That's also one important point, that it is getting very high in the agenda of the chairmanship countries. We have UN Youth Envoy, the OSCE Chairperson Office Special Representative on UN Security, which are like the faces of the youth, peace, and security agenda, echoing hard work of people behind the scenes in executive structures and trying to bring the fruits of work of young people and youth-led organizations to representatives in New York and Vienna during events like this. Vice versa, we also want to bring the attention to young people that their work is being heard, that diplomats in Vienna or in New York, that governments and international community care about their work. Events like these show that we have reached a stage where this process is taken serious and intergenerational dialogue on core questions of peace and security can be discussed through a youth lens. Frequently, in different articles and even agendas, even in speeches of many representatives, I see that youth is portrayed as a challenge. However, this is a myth, and this is a wrong assumption. At the end of the day, we cannot demonize young people like we should also not idealize them. Violent youth identities, however, are more often systematically shaped from above. It is primarily governments and political leaders who seek to mobilize and often to manipulate the role and function of young people for their own political needs. Where young people are excluded, a small minority may forge alternative places of belonging, status, or power that exacerbate the risk of violence, creating a potential vicious circle. However, then we have to ask ourselves, why these young people feel excluded? And then the second question may be, because there are opportunities when they are offered space, why they do not want to join this space they are being offered. Vast majority of young people are not involved in violence at all, or instead, many of them are ready to take the stand to promote peace and understanding through various ways, driving political change, rebuild broken relationships, and even addressing underlying causes of conflict. Strengthening the active political and social and economic participation of young women and men is the key to allow young people to participate as positive change makers and bridge builders in their societies. We need to give young people space on different levels, from community to international, and to make their voices heard. Young people care about the present and future. They are allies and not enemies at all. Take a look, as was already mentioned, the Fridays for Future initiative, led by high school students, then joined by their university peers, and eventually, just very recently, by their parents. Climate change and environment becomes of utmost insecurity aspects even for children. I have a sister, she's 11 years old, and even she's telling me the stories how important it is to protect the environment and to separate the waste and all the things like that. 11 years. So I imagine all her peers are similar to that. Today we have a young generation that is active and willing to engage. Let's make sure that they are taken serious. And it is not only about environment, but many other areas, including corruption. Corruption spreads like poison in our societies, regardless of whether you are east or west or in Vienna. Manifestations, including young people, just as in my own country, I was born and raised in Slovakia, against injustice and corruption show that young people, together with senior peers, are on the same boat to counter corruption and injustice. Young people are not blind. They are not stupid. They see what is going on around, and they see what is going on in our societies. We need to engage young people into decision-making processes, not on the basis of tokenism, but genuinely. The recognition and participation of young people as peacemakers and enablers of positive and peaceful change is critical to ensure their investment in the future of peace processes and guaranteeing the durability of peace through generations. We cannot have sustainable peace if young generation is not included, because, as it was said, they are the present, but they are the future as well. Young people need to feel the genuine ownership of ongoing processes. To provide an example, and this I'm very happy of, that Slovak chairmanship and our delegations here in Vienna supported the Perspectives 2030. Perspectives 2030 is an initiative which aims to bring together 20 bright minds, young experts together in order to provide their own vision of security and cooperation in Europe till 2030 and beyond. We all know we find ourselves in deep crisis when it comes to regional and international security and effective multilateralism, as has been said. And young people know the truth. It is like that. So I'm very happy that we have found these 20 really interesting, smart minds that are willing to propose their ideas. And I'm also very happy that it's not only one-way flow, but also on the other side, chairperson in office, Ambassador Mr. Lajčák, or Secretary General are willing and ready to hear the results of this initiative. So when we are talking about engaging young people into consulting or into decision-making processes, I believe that this is one of those positive examples. Besides that, Slovakia decided to foster the youth peace and security in the OSCE through the following steps: strengthening capacities of the OSCE to make effective use its youth expertise for comprehensive security and cooperation. Second, mainstreaming youth perspectives and promoting youth participation. And third, increase the visibility and ownership of OSCE as a regional player in advancing the global youth peace and security agenda. However, as always, there is still much more to do. As stated in UN Progress Study on Youth, it's called Missing Peace. Personally, I very much recommend you to read it. It's a great piece. For societies and countries to fully harness and support the innovation of young people's contributions to peace and to begin to work towards the seismic challenges set out above, 3 mutually reinforcing strategies are needed. First, it is critical to invest in young people's capacities, agency, and leadership through substantial funding support, network building, and capacity strengthening, recognizing the full diversity of youth and the ways young people organize themselves. Second, the systems that reinforce exclusion must be transformed in order to address the structural barriers limiting youth participation in peace and security. And third, partnerships and collaborative action where young people are viewed as equal and essential partners for peace must be prioritized. To create a safer and more secure OSCE area, we all have to play our role. The youth of today will be the adults of tomorrow. We need young people's energy, passion, ideas, and also their experience to fulfill our task of promoting peaceful and comprehensive security in our region. An English writer, Samuel Johnson, one of my favorite, he was a great inspiration for many of us. He just said that people sometimes they do not need to be instructed. They just need to be reminded instead. So I hope that this event will be a great reminder of how to partner with young people for prevention, sustaining peace, and addressing violence, crime, and corruption. Thank you very much for your attention.
To invite the first speakers for the first panel to the stage. Monica, Jean-Luc, Martin, and Philippe. That's good. So I first would like to start with a short introduction. Then my speakers, the panelists, will each have some 8 to 10 minutes to elaborate on their work, and then I will open the floor for Q&As. So as I said before, in 1979, the title of the panel is the United Nations in Vienna, 40 years of promoting peace and security. In 1979, Austria handed over the VIC to the United Nations, and today Austria hosts the third of 4 UN headquarters worldwide, some 40 international organizations, and an important international community. And this panel is highly representative of this strong and active international presence in Vienna. We have the United Nations, the OSCE, and the Ban Ki-moon Center represented. Monika Fröhler, to my right, is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens in Vienna. Before that, Monika worked with the United Nations Under-Secretary General for Sustainable Energy, setting up the International Sea for All Secretariat in Vienna. You have been working with us in the Foreign Ministry, and you have advised quite a few permanent representatives of Austria. Jean-Luc Lemanieux is the Director for Public Analysis and Public Affairs of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Vienna. He has been in the position for more than 5 years. He has 20 years of field experience and served inter alia 5 years in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, in the Caribbean and Latin America. He also worked with UNIDO, and I want to point out that one of his first appointments with the United Nations was as junior professional officer. Martin Niserki is director of the United Nations Information Service in Vienna. Prior to that, Martin was the spokesperson for Secretary General Ban Ki-moon for more than 4 years, and before that he served as spokesperson for the OSCE in Vienna. Early in his career, he was working with Reuters news agency in London, Moscow, The Hague, Berlin, and Seoul. Philippe Tremblay, head of the External Cooperation Service in the Office of the Secretary General of the OSCE in Vienna. He's actually on leave from the Diplomatic Service of Canada. Philippe held assignments as Director for Specialized Services at Canada's National Police Agency, as Deputy Head of Mission and Chargé d'Affaires at the Embassy of Canada in Turkey. He also worked at the Embassy in Canada to Japan. Now, a quick reference to the independent progress study on youth and peace and security, which is actually the basis of our discussions and inspire our discussions today. The independent progress study was published in March 2018 as mandated by United Nations Security Council Resolution 2250. And it analyzes the essential role of young people as agents for prevention and change. It says, in order to fully harness young people's contributions, the authors of the study see the need of 3 mutually reinforcing strategies: investment in the capacities, agency, and leadership of young people; second, from exclusion to meaningful inclusion of young people; national, regional, global partnerships for youth and peace and security, and all these 3 strands come with a set of recommendations. Now, my question to the panel, and I wish to start with Jean-Luc. What is and has been the contribution of the United Nations in Vienna to help implement this youth, peace and security agenda? Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. I mean, it's my pleasure to be here with you today. I will keep it very short and brief, and then afterwards I'm ready to accept any questions which you may have. I mean, as a Director of Policy and Analysis dealing with research, I would be amiss in not quoting a few figures with regard to opportunities, as we have heard. Samuel, you mentioned that it's not only about the challenge, it's also about the opportunities. And the opportunities, I mean, in a mirror picture, I mean, you might know that the average age in Germany is 46.5 years, Japan 46.1, Austria 44.3, Greece 43.5, Canada 41.7, etc., etc., etc. The German population will shrink by 1/5 by 2060. the Japanese population will shrink by a third by 2065. Compare that to the youngest countries in the world, and most of those youngest countries in the world are in Africa, apart from Afghanistan, Palestine, and East Timor. All the other 25 or 22 territories in the world are in Africa. You would say a fantastic opportunity, isn't it? I mean, on one hand, I mean, supply and demand. I mean, we have a shortage of population in an economically very valued part of the world, and on the other hand, we have a growth of population, of a young population globally in the other side of the world. Why don't we try to exchange? Well, we all know it goes a bit more difficult than only economics would allow us to conclude on the same. A lot of energy with young people, no doubt, entrepreneurial energy, and some of that energy, most of that energy, luckily very well placed, some of that energy regretfully falling well in the mandate of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. If you look at the homicide report, which we will publish very soon, the 8th of July, well, no surprise, especially male adolescents aged between 15 and 29 are at the highest risk of homicide globally. So we should be doing better on that part in this context. Now, that is especially due to the situation in the Americas. I mean, gangs, and that should ring a bell as well in how we will operate with crime prevention. Why are young people, why feel they that necessity, I mean, to join a gang? Why are there not other opportunities? But a lot of the youth pool in fragile countries, and that is, of course, for us as well, a massive problem, a challenge as such, because fragility by itself is not necessarily an open door towards criminality. And let me try to explain it a little bit, but it is something which we need to look at. There's no country in the world which does not have crime. But the resilience of the country, I mean, the institutional strength of that country, and as well the proportionality of crime related to illicit activities, the proportionality of licit economies related to the crime world is very important. Give an example. I mean, HSBC, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank Corporation, has been fined for 1.6 billion. Now that has given a sneeze in the London capital market, nothing more. The Kabul bank embezzlement, 1.2 billion, costed Afghanistan 5% of its GDP. So a big difference in resilience there. And where you have vulnerability, you don't necessarily have criminality, but you have criminal opportunity looking to exploit that vulnerability. And bring that back to the youth framework, I mean, that's something which we need to keep in mind. I mean, if people have no ways in getting their entrepreneurial energy in a correct manner enveloped, helping the country moving forward in ways we all would prefer, then we have definitely work on hand. And for UNIC, we do have a lot of work, I can tell you. And the biggest stakeholders are indeed, I mean, the young people. So what are we doing? I mean, first of all, some very generic mentionings. I mean, yes, we are part of the Joint Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security, as you clearly mentioned. We're also a member of the Global Coalition on Youth, Peace and Security. Within our commissions, our own governing boards, we do have youth fora organized every time over again and trying to get as many youth involved within setting the policies of those commissions. But within the technical assistance, how we roll out our activities, I mean, that's very important. And I will be very, very short on that because there's so much to be said. But just think cybercrime and see, I mean, the vulnerability of youngsters. I mean, it's not my grandma who will be on the internet and being vulnerable for a cybercrime. It's the young people who use whatever is available to them. Think as well, I mean, about urban security. I mean, we are now laying out audits in urban areas, I mean, to try to gauge how we can enclose the youth better in often very fast developing urban areas throughout the world. Drug prevention, clearly. I mean, the chances, I mean, to get a problem user between an adolescent or youngster before the age of 26 and post the age of 26 is very, very different. It relates basically 1 to 6. So the prevention which we roll out, towards the youngsters is increasingly important. But two elements here which I would like to mention is the Doha Declaration. I have seen Julia Pilgrim here from my office, who is dealing with that. The Doha Declaration came out of the Doha Crime Congress about 4 years ago. It's a big program which is indeed sponsored by the government of Qatar. And there are two elements which I would like to share with you. The first one relates to education for justice. Now, from the early stages of childhood, prevention needs to be embedded. When you're a teenager, when you're 12 years old, the messaging comes too late. You need really to tailor-made that kind of messaging, life skill messaging from the very early stages. Now, we have a fun page, for those who are still funny enough to would like to lower themselves to the age group up to 6. We have a fun page for the parents among you, or the future parents among you. Get your children there with the ZORBs. It's really fantastic. It is an amazing framework where we reach out to very, very young people. But as well for secondary schools, we have a similar reaching out. And for those who would like to know more, I can tell you at this moment, for the tertiary university group, we have at this moment 14 modules, if I'm not mistaken, to talk about very diverse forms of crime and how to prevent crime. And I really would recommend you to look into that one. The second one in the Doha Declaration is indeed the sports which we're trying to develop. When we talk gangs, it's often a question of belonging. It's a question of self-esteem. It's a question of confidence. It's a question of having that feel that you belong in a wider framework. Well, sports can give you that one. And again, we roll out, a big program within the Doha framework on that activities. How can youth feel that they belong? How can they learn life skills which take them away from the, let's say, not always positive elements of entrepreneurial energy, which we definitely see among youngsters. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jean-Luc. I think there will be quite a few questions afterwards on the inspiring programs and important programs the United Nations in Vienna has in order to give opportunities and also to make young people have the sense of belonging. Education for justice, for me, seems very, very important. Crime prevention, definitely a main issue. I just want to now move on to Monica, and I wish to indicate the Ban Ki-moon Center was inaugurated in January 2018, and it is focusing on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030, and in particular is focusing on youth and women and their empowerment. Monica, you have the floor.
Exactly. The Ban Ki-moon Center is very happy to be part of this wonderful Vienna Seminar. Thanks goes to IPI, thanks goes to the Foreign Ministry, and of course also thanks to the Defense Ministry. What we are particularly happy about is that I see so many young faces here in the audience, because it is you that I want to address particularly, and it is you who I want to share my latest findings with. Youth in peacemaking is crucial. And probably all of you know, and we have heard in various statements this morning, that Ban Ki-moon has set a particular focus on that. He is interested to involve youth and women proactively in the implementation of the SDGs and in peacemaking, in prevention of conflict. But we have already heard a couple of facts today. Another fact is that we are right now talking about the biggest generation of youth that has ever existed on the planet. We are 8 billion people. The projection is we will be 12 billion in a couple of years' time, even still in our lifetime. This is a massive challenge that we will face. However, wherever there is a challenge, and the greater the challenge, the greater the opportunity. Fact is also that 408 million youth are actually currently living in areas that are affected by armed conflict. 408 million. And if you're thinking about that number, that's the whole population. I did the maths yesterday of Germany, Turkey, Russia, Iran, and Somalia combined. Can you imagine this? This is massive. All of these young people are in obviously a transitional phase, because we are talking here particularly about the age group 15 to 29, and it is not like race ethnicity, religion, that you will be that all your life, but you are that for a certain point in time, which makes it also interesting and difficult for certain processes to focus on the right partners. They are shifting many times. That's not a justification not to involve youth. Quite on the contrary, we need to do more. And as you probably know, I guess many of you have already read the Security Council Resolution 2250. I guess hands up who has read 2250? Brilliant. Who has read the subsequent one, 2419? That was an reiteration. Wonderful, I see some hands up. I advise those that haven't, read it, because it is basically the normative basis of where we are acting as youth within the framework of peacemaking, prevention of conflict, and even prevention of violent extremism to a certain extent. What has manifested from them, and it has been quoted before, was a paper that is called The Missing Piece. It was written by Graham Simpson, and it illustrated how youth has already contributed to various processes. But observing this paper, what is lacking is often what are the practical guidance tools, how is it actually done in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Sudan? How was it done that youth was included? And probably I can give you, and I'm sorry if I'm giving you all of these reading recommendations, but this is something that is close to my heart. I was invited in March 2019, and Anna-Katrin was there as well, and maybe some, I don't know if anyone else out of this room was present in Helsinki. The Finnish government invited to a meeting, the first international symposium on youth in peacemaking. And Yayatma, who is the youth envoy of the United Nations, was present, the OSCE was present, the EU was present, even the UN General Assembly, PGA, stellar people, ministers from all sorts of countries, Qatar, Colombia, Finland. But key was the youth representation that was coming from the ground, from the grassroots level, from Syria, from even Northern Ireland, from Colombia, from Sudan, from Afghanistan, who shared their insights in what kind of difficulties they encountered entering into the processes. Let me go a bit into depth of this paper, because the paper was the basis of our considerations, and it will be uploaded on the Ban Ki-moon Center website, so everyone who wants to have a quick read of it, please feel encouraged. I met the two researchers, Ali Altiok and Irene Griselli, who have formulated this on behalf of the governments that entrusted them, as an elaboration of the piece that I mentioned before, the missing piece. So this is the concrete, practical examples where youth has already participated. They clustered it, and please imagine with me, into concentric circles. The innermost concentric circle is the one of the actual peace negotiations. The next level would be like at the table, youth being at the table. The next circle would be around the room, and the next circle would be outside of the room. And they have found amazing examples for all of these. And maybe let me, if I still have a couple of minutes, go into one or the other example. Within the room, we can look at an example of the Central African Republic. In the room means that youngsters, young people are involved actually in the negotiation, and they are part of the negotiation and delegation team. This has happened in the Central African Republic. For example, Samuel Sayo, who was a leader of a rebel group, was involved in the Brazzaville ceasefire negotiations. But mind you, he was a rebel himself and was someone who was effectively creating violence. And yet he was involved, and this is often a phenomenon that we see with youngsters that are involved in the delegation, that many of them are actually perpetrators of violence. So it's often not necessarily the peacemakers that are involved in these delegations, but former soldiers. Things to mull about. Another aspect where young people are involved in the actual peacemaking is they are considered to be part of the technical and thematic teams. This has happened particularly in matters of SSR, consortia, land reform, and constitution building. And let me tell you one example, one more, that I have encountered in my past couple of months. Tunisia, as you know, after the Arab Spring, had the big task of creating a new constitution. And there was a minister of digitalization who really saw the youth having to play a role in this effort. But they only said, it was wise men gathered around a table who crafted the constitution. The youth were merely those that tweeted about the considerations, and they were sitting at the margins of the room. But they tweeted so extensively that the feedback loop they got was detrimental for the negotiations of the constitution that took place in the room. And the Minister of Digitalization at that time realized it and started talking to the youngsters, asking them, what kind of feedback did you get from outside? And eventually they moved from the rim of the room to the middle of the room and actually looped in what the public, that was strongly anticipating what was said in the room, was feeding back to them. And the constitution process, fortunately, was enriched by the participation of them. But it is still the exception and not the rule. Often you have young people as the resource persons within the team. They support the logistics of such negotiations, they support the technology of such negotiations, but we are talking about having them at the table and not necessarily only in the supporting roles, so a major difference. When it comes to around the room, let me give you an example. There are youth committees that are drawn on whenever there is a peace negotiation in the best of cases. In Yemen, we had a 20% quota for all stakeholders at the National Dialogue Conference. In the Great Lakes region, we had a whole regional youth forum. It was a youth committee dedicated at the margins of the peace negotiations. And in Afghanistan as well, there is even a new peace advisory body that was created in 2018, including a youth affairs committee. Sometimes countries are involving youth in formal consultation processes, so that would be another strata, not only these delegated committees, but a formal process. Colombia did that with 7,900 youngsters that were actually gathered in national tables around the country to be asked how they could be involved and how they were involved in negotiations with the FARC. Outside of the room, and this is my last point that I want to make, there are also great examples where NGOs, particularly youth-driven NGOs, have a vested interest, and not only an interest, but activities. The FARC, Colombia again being a case in point, love letters were formulated by a lot of youth towards former FARC or active FARC rebels. And these love letters basically asked for them to cease hostilities and to be reintegrated into societies. And it caused tremendous upheaval in the society because fact was, as you know, the youth movement spurred after the peace agreement was tried to be brokered. It was then rejected first by the population, but the youth movement was then the one that brought back the discussions and steered so many hearts and minds that after a month of reconsidering, the actual peace agreement followed. So that's a case in point where the outside of the room actually had great effects on the inside of the room. My appeal to you is, check out this paper. It's really inspirational when it comes to this paper. Here we are. No, we are here. It's really inspirational about illustrating some of the stories that have happened. If that's not enough inspiration, and I come to an end, check out what Samuel is doing in the OSCE context as youth envoy. Check out what Aya Chebi is doing. She's the UN, the African Union youth envoy. And check out what Yayatma is doing. She's the UN youth envoy. All of them have youth inclusion in peacemaking and prevention in their agenda. And it's worthwhile to tap into them. And another appeal, my very last one, if you want to become active yourself as a peacemaker, as someone who is more involved in these processes, go to UNOI. They are a big network of young peacemakers active in more than 60 countries globally. They are seeking people to join them, and they definitely feed into the processes that we can expect in the future in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Monika, for this practical examples and your references to different countries. I now want to move on to Philippe. We have heard from Samuel, our keynote speaker, from the OSCE. Now, please, your insights on the important work of the OSCE regarding our topic today.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you to IPI and the Austrian MFA to host us in this incredible venue. And you've heard already from Samuel about the work of the OSCE regarding youth. I'll touch on youth. I'll also touch a little bit broader on OSCE perspective on security in Europe and Euro-Atlantic area as well. So the positive role of young people has been increasingly recognized, as we've mentioned, within the OSCE context. And at the last Ministerial Council in Milan, our participating states adopted a declaration on the role of youth in contribution to peace and security. And it's acknowledged that we are now doing youth and gender mainstreaming throughout the three dimensions of OSCE security, which are political, military, economic, environment, and human. So this is very important to consider that at the OSCE we are trying to bring in youth and gender, but also youth consideration into all of the work we do. And this is in line, as was mentioned, with UN Security Council Resolution 2250 and 2419. As a UN Charter 8 organization, the OSCE is committed to support the implementation of UN goals and commitments at the regional level in key areas as sustainable development, countering terrorism, conflict prevention and resolution through this comprehensive approach to security that I mentioned. And this is very important for this year. Our chair in office is Slovakia, under the leadership of CIO Minister Lajčák, is putting multilateralism and effective multilateralism high on the agenda, and how to engage youth for a safer future. And this helps us connecting the dots between our work in Vienna and what's happening at the UN in New York. A little bit of the bigger picture in terms of OSCE priorities. And you all know this, the OSCE is Vienna-based, but I'll mention it in any case. It's a natural diplomatic forum for solving today's crisis of trust. We've heard from already some speakers that there is a crisis of trust, there is a crisis of multilateralism. We are not sure where the next 20, 30 years will bring us. So the OSCE in the Euro-Atlantic, European, and Eurasian areas is a forum, a diplomatic forum, and probably one of the only forum which still includes the West, broadly speaking, in Russia, in one room where we can discuss issues that are tensing this, that are impacting this crisis of trust. So we have the flexibility, the tools, and the expertise to bring stability and peace, and to revive this culture of cooperation. So I'm going to use two examples of what the OSCE is doing now. First is the structured dialogue. This is an initiative that's been existing for the last 2 or 3 years, and it's to reduce military risk as a priority. It's an inclusive platform to reverse negative trends undermining arms control and security architecture in Europe. So it's confidence and security building measure. This dialogue for the past 2 years has considered threat perception, military doctrines, force postures, and military activities. This year, the main focus is on risk reduction, incident prevention, and transparency. And the second, I would say, is related to the rapid technological advances we are witnessing, and which youth, I think, will have a voice and a role to play in the next 10, 15 years, is to develop cyber and ICT confidence building measures against CBMs. This is a good example of why multilateralism is better than a me-first world. It's hard to attribute it's a challenge to attribute cyber threats, where the threat is coming from. And very often that means that there's little room for cooperation or dialogue. Yet, the 57 participating states of the OSCE have agreed to 16 groundbreaking cyber ICT CBMs, with the aim to increase transparency and predictability by reducing misperception. So this is 2 examples where the OSCE is working, but we need participating states to rebuild trust and to increase our faith in multilateralism once again. So I would say that this is related to our leveraging partnership goals, to increasing relations between the OSCE and the UN, and I'll just mention a few points on youths. Most importantly, the OSCE organized the Security Days at the VIC 2 weeks ago, and the role was to discuss the OSCE and sustainable development goals. So one clear takeaway would be that young women and men must feel ownership of their society. In the YPS portfolio, Spain, which chairs the group of friends on youth and security, invited the lead author, Graham Simpson, to discuss the key finding of the progress study on youth, peace, and security, and how relevant this is for the OSCE. Also, as Samuel mentioned, I'll briefly touch on the Perspective 2030 initiative. This is important work for the OSCE right now. And the goal is to mainstream, to meaningfully integrate these youth perspectives into OSCE security debates. So this will strengthen the organization's ability to promote peace, stability, and security throughout the region. In this end, we invited a group of young experts to Vienna to share their vision on security cooperation towards the year 2030 and beyond, and hopefully they will be able to contribute some meaningful perspective to what security will look like in Europe in 10 years, in 10 to 20 years. So their perspective will spark discussions at an OSCE-wide youth forum in Bratislava in late October, and will provide food for thought for security-related debates, including, hopefully, at the Bratislava Ministerial Council in December. And this will help us, hopefully, to adopt a more coherent and coordinated OSCE approach to working with youth and for youth. And to this end, we're also developing an internal framework on strengthening OSCE efforts on youth and security, which is aligned with the UN Youth 2030 strategy as well, in particular priority 5 on YPS. My colleague Anna Katrina will also share more concrete example of what the OSCE is doing this afternoon. And I'll also mention one statistic that's interesting for the OSCE. We have partners for cooperation in the Mediterranean region and Asia. And what we were speaking with our Med partners is that 60% of the population in the Med basin is under 30 years old, which is an incredible statistic, 60%. Of course, the OSCE can only do so much. These are partners for cooperation, but what we're doing is implementing a youth and green awards scheme, which is each country, each partner identifies one youth leader in green energy, in green sustainability, and the OSCE will partner with that individual or with that company in that specific country to develop either their company, their project, their vision in their years to come. They're very small awards. We're talking about 10,000, 15,000 euros. But this is what we're doing, for example, in the Med area with our partners. So thank you. I'll leave it at that, and if there's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. I think it was very important, your focus on mainstreaming youth issues in the overall work of the OSCE, and also the coordinated approach, a very important topic, and I guess we will come back to that later. I would now want to invite Martin to bring in his opinions and views and experience, probably especially also on how to promote the United Nations and the multilateral work with youth.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you to the Foreign Ministry, the Defense Ministry, and of course IPI. Thank you, Adam, and Samuel also for your perspectives, and particularly for providing that foundation, the 40th anniversary of the Vienna International Center. I'll come back to that. It's not just about a cake with 40 candles. We do love anniversaries. You spoke tantalizingly about it being the 49th Vienna Seminar. So we're looking at 50 next year and the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. So I can see a marriage made in heaven there. So prevention is arguably Secretary General Guterres's top priority in many senses, including, for example, on climate action. And indeed, it was a top priority for his predecessor, Secretary General Ban. But I want to take you somewhere different to begin with. We've heard a lot about countries and the focus that we should quite rightly put on Yemen, Central African Republic, Afghanistan, and so on. The Horn of Africa, we were speaking very interestingly yesterday. Thank you for your insights on that. But I want to take you to a small town about an hour's drive from Vienna, Neunkirchen. You've probably driven past it on the way to Semmering in the winter to go skiing, but maybe not actually gone there. Well, I went there just a few weeks ago as part of our roadshow, which we're organizing along with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the city of Vienna, to take the Vienna International Center on the road to the Austrian provinces, and we'll be going elsewhere too. And we went to a middle school in this small town. So middle school means youngsters 10 to early teens. Yes, we had an exhibition about the 40th anniversary of the Vienna International Center, but importantly, and keep in mind this is a regional town in Lower Austria, there are 25 different nationalities in this school, including from Somalia, Syria, and other parts of the world. And the point of the exercise was to look at inclusion and how to work in an enriching way with diversity. So this was a really concrete example of how we can work with young people closer to home sometimes, and to help to build a sense of a broader world out there. And of course, there was a heavy focus on the Sustainable Development Goals, and indeed, that is the thread that runs through everything that we're trying to do in our work on raising the visibility of the Vienna-based organizations this year. Not just this year, but obviously that's the prism for the 40th anniversary, because if we've heard about the work of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, we also have, as we heard earlier on, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs. Whoever knew we had an Office for Outer Space Affairs? We do. It's about 25 people dealing with an expanding universe. That's a lot of work. So what's the common thread? And the common thread amongst these diverse organizations has to be the Sustainable Development Goals. Yes, of course, that's a universal theme, but it's what can loop us together. And it is a critical part, and it's mentioned in the report that Monica was referring to. Young people, if you ask them about peace and security, they say yes, but how we get there and how we maintain that is through sustainable development. We need to build more resilient societies, our communities, and working on the goals is the way that we can do that. And the city of Vienna and the ministry both clearly recognize that, and that's, as a triumvirate, we've worked really nicely to come up with a number of events, including, as I say, this roadshow. Some concrete examples of what the Vienna-based organizations are doing. You've heard extremely eloquently from Jean-Luc about the work of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. If you check out our portal, you just need to Google United Nations Vienna. The website is unvienna.org. That's our shop window for all of the organizations, and it takes you through to the respective organizations' own sites. And at the top, we have two clickable sets of information, one on the Sustainable Development Goals and one on prevention, with concrete examples of what the Vienna-based organizations are doing in both of those spheres, which of course are interlinked. There's the UN Office for Disarmament Affairs has a Vienna office. It's headquartered in New York, but we have a Vienna office. And working very closely with the OSCE on an initiative to provide scholarships and education, further education for extremely talented young professional women already working in the field of peace and particularly disarmament. And I had the pleasure of meeting those young women at a recent event, and this is a really tremendous initiative. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, they are hosting a big science and technology conference in just a couple of weeks' time in the Hofburg, not far from here, the former Imperial Palace. A key focus there will be on young people and including young people. Former Secretary General Bahn will be there, former Austrian President Heinz Fischer will be there, the Executive Secretary of the CTBTO will be there, and most crucially, the CTBTO's youth network will be heavily involved in this. And this was a tremendous initiative that has really helped to spread the word and to help to galvanize young people to get us where we need to be in the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization, which is to encourage, cajole, those countries that have not yet signed up or ratified the treaty to do so. So young people's role in this is really crucial. The UN Industrial Development Organization is also based with us in the Vienna International Center, of course. They work very closely with ISEC, which is a huge, one of the largest, if not the largest, youth organization worldwide, with a heavy focus on sustainable development. And UNIDO, the UN Industrial Development Organization, works, for example, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in countries that have either emerged from conflict or are at risk for different reasons, and works very closely with young people and young entrepreneurs, for example, to help them to move forward in a way that you've just mentioned about the Mediterranean Basin and the partners for cooperation. Then my team, the UN Information Service, we support Model United Nations conferences in 4 countries, yes, here in Austria, but also in Slovakia, Slovenia, and Hungary. This is a fantastic way to work with young people and to encourage them in the work that they do, and to receive fantastic feedback from them on how we can do even better. And I think this is a key point that I want to make. We can do a lot of work on stressing the relevance and significance of the Vienna-based organizations. We need to do much, much better on visibility. And I say that as the head of the information service. We need to do a much, much better job. If you look at the visibility for the United Nations set up in Geneva, there are various reasons for this, but we need to do much better, and we could very much draw on your ideas for how we can do better at that, for sure. We also, for example, in Slovakia, we work very closely with the Human Rights Olympics Initiative, which is a fantastic program that runs in high schools across the country and culminates in a final. There's debating, there's essay writing, and a tremendous way from at a grassroots level to really embed the importance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is a tremendous program. We also have people coming to visit us. If you haven't taken a guided tour of the Vienna International Center, then you need to do so. We get 55,000 visitors a year, many of them, of course, young people, and we have specific tours, including on sustainable development. We do have tours that focus also on prevention. I really want to mention two final things. One is the role of the UN Association here in Vienna, and particularly the youth branch, AFA. They're doing a tremendous job. You are doing a tremendous job. Is anybody here with AFA, a member of the Foreign Policy Association? No? Spread the word. I need to do it even better. If you haven't joined up, then you need to do so, because they're doing really excellent work in particularly in reaching out to the Austrian provinces. So this is an area I wanted to emphasize. And finally, I wanted to come back to the Secretary General's visit here just 2 weeks ago, Monday and Tuesday, the 27th and 28th. The first thing he did after dropping his suitcase at the hotel was to go to the Brunnenpassage, which is not the fanciest part of town, it has to be said. But it's a fantastic, it's a really ethnically diverse and cosmopolitan part of town. There is an art center there. Yo-Yo Ma, world-famous cellist, who also happens to be a United Nations Messenger of Peace, was in town for a concert on the 28th, but he had a day of action on the 27th, which was looking at dialogue and the role of culture in dialogue in a fractured world. And he was also looking at the role of young people in this. Yo-Yo Ma had brought in young people and older people too, but with a heavy emphasis on young people for a kind of a workshop. And the Secretary General dropped by there, and this was all about tolerance, it was all about compassion, it was all about solidarity. And this was a tremendous first stop. It was bookended, if you like, after the ceremony in the Vienna International Center for the 40th anniversary. The Secretary General went up to our new digital media hub, which phase one of which has been really kindly funded by the Austrian Foreign Ministry, and this is a space where we will be able to reach out to people much more effectively and help to raise visibility. What did we do there? We had Greta Thunberg in the room. with the Secretary General, and the Secretary General did his first Instagram live from there. We're very proud of this, as you can see. Fantastic branding, United Nations Vienna in the background. And this was all about her quizzing him about the challenge of climate change and climate action. What should he be doing more? And that includes, of course, the summit he will be hosting in New York in September, where he said, don't bring a speech, bring commitments. And young people are obviously heavily involved in this. So that I will leave it there. Those are some of the points that I wanted to raise, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. I think it was quite interesting that you mentioned Neunkirchen and the importance for all of us to work on good practices regarding inclusion and also the sustainable developments that they actually apply for all of us. I now would like to open the floor for Q&As. Are there any questions from the audience? Please, in the first row. Would you like to identify yourself, please? The mic.
Hello, my name is Joseph. I'm from Myanmar Mission to UN. I'd like to pose one question to Mr. Martin Nysitsky regarding his presentation, especially when he mentioned the role of Vienna-based organization, especially youth. That's a framework. Can you explain more about how that organization, how the youth is involved in this activity, the role of
Which one, sorry?
Efren, you said something like
AFA.
Yes, please.
Yes.
May I just add, they are not here because I think they were invited, of course. They have their own event today, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
There you
Okay.
see. Active as always. Yeah.
Yes, active as always.
Okay.
Thank
Would you like me to answer now, or are you going
Please,
to? Sure.
please.
Sure. So, I guess maybe it's not necessarily my place to do the sales pitch for the United Nations organization. It is for the United Nations organization, but not for the United Nations Association directly, except that the UN Association here in Austria is arguably one of the best organized anywhere in the world. And it works very closely and is supported very well by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs here. And they have a youth branch which then has outposts in the Austrian provinces, in Graz, for example, in Innsbruck. And these are young people who wish to spread the word about the values and the work of the United Nations and the relevance of the work of the United Nations to young people and more broadly. So they are a tremendous communications channel, bringing a great energy to the work that they do. And so this is how that works. They're also behind one of the longest running Model United Nations conferences, the Vienna International Model United Nations Conference, known as VMUN. It will be taking place this summer, and they hold that event in the Vienna International Center. So the young people, the students, and other young people who come for that conference really get a tremendous feeling that because they're actually in real conference rooms at the United Nations, and so this really adds to the atmosphere in the role-playing that they go through. So that's just one area of the work they're doing, and they've been very supportive for the 40th anniversary events too. Yeah.
Yes, please. From the panel, you want to add something?
I would just like to add, yes, AFA. We are greatly collaborating with AFA as Ban Ki-moon Center, because not only do they gather hundreds, if not thousands, of youth at points in time, but also, Martin already alluded to it, very concretely, on the 24th of June, we have a massive event at the Hofburg. All of you are cordially invited. The event, particularly focused on youth, will take place in the afternoon at the Imperial Palace. It is hosted by CDBT, but it's all about SDGs and how youth can contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. And there is a quick way to register. I have to tell you, there is a cumbersome way via the CDBTO website. It takes about half an hour to do so. If you still want to quickly register, there is a chance until 12 o'clock, 12th of June, so another hour and a half, to write an email with just your name, your email address, and your passport picture to wien@afa.at, and then you come on a short list and you get the entry into the Hofburg on that day for the youth segment. Please do so. We would love to see many of your faces there because Ban Ki-moon Center, together with CDBTO, together with AFA, will host a major youth event. Please come. Please.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Margaret Williams, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Many thanks for all of your remarks, your insight, and your experience. I have a general question, so feel free to take it as you wish and as is relevant for your work. The theme of communication has come up quite a bit, either directly or indirectly, and I think in general, we struggle to get out our message and our messages in a sustainable way, and we struggle to listen in a sustainable way. So how do you see going forward, particularly vis-a-vis youth prevention and your particular organization's mandate, what would you recommend for yourselves to strengthen your both your messaging and your listening to bring in a more kind of diverse array of voices into your policy and your programs?
If you allow me, indeed. Well, you might or you might not know eventually, because out of the question I would think you would not know, but we do have a campaign rolled out when it comes to drug prevention, which is indeed called Listen First. And it's a message which is sent out to the adults in the sense of, listen, you will have, nowadays, it's typical for the youth. I mean, adults have been young as well, experimenting with different living circumstances and types and so on. But instead of being on the condemning side, and instead of saying, I mean, no, you cannot, or no, you should not, I mean, you need to try to listen first. I mean, what is the reason why people would entice? Why are they going for certain behaviors? And is it transient? I mean, is it something which is transitionary? I mean, in the sense of, listen, you're young and you will get out of that framework. I mean, we see in criminality that a lot of the criminality is related to age. I mean, it is a criminality factor paradigm which has been accepted for centuries now. I mean, it very much relates to a certain age group and then grows out for most of them. But listen first is extremely important. And listen first, I mean, from the early childhood onwards, I mean, trying to get the messaging across. It's beyond the social networking, which is very important. And of course, I mean, we are, as any decent grouping nowadays, involved with, you just name it, of social networking as it exists. But that does not take away, I mean, the very human trait of having to listen, to communicate, to try to understand. From the early childhood, because that's where indeed, I mean, the child's brain starts to format. I mean, you might or you might not know, but the format in medical terms of your brain will take up to the age of 26. That's an average. I mean, it can be 24, can be some much later. It's an average 26. But that means as well, I mean, that you have a hell of a lot of work to do, I mean, before that, to make sure that you get certain characteristics, I mean, the nurturing within the brain material. But as well, from a medical perspective, if you would start, I mean, with certain substances early enough, the risk that you will have your craving mechanisms in your brains instilled up to the age of 26, let's say, in a manner where you will never be able to get away from the addiction. I mean, you might be able to live with an addiction, but you will have a chronic disease with you for a lifetime. Now, it does not mean that after 26, suddenly you can go and experiment whatever you want to experiment with. It just means that your chances increase dramatically before. So for us, from a medical perspective, but a psychological perspective, a criminal justice prevention perspective, listen first is definitely a big flag.
Is there anybody else who wants to take the sequence? Yes.
Gladly answer to great communication, great listening is definitely the basis for much of the work. Maybe let me zoom in concretely to what the Ban Ki-moon Center is currently trying to do in this regard. We have a project of fellowships, women empowerment fellowships. We are promoting that obviously via our social media channels, but also with the help of permanent missions. These women empowerment fellowships are trainings, capacity trainings on gender issues, SDG issues, but also even mediation and communication that will take place in Vienna in collaboration with the Vienna Diplomatic Academy. Young ladies aged 22 to potentially 35 will be from Asia. There's a cohort of Asia that we have fully funded and a cohort from the Middle East, from GCC countries. And we try not only to listen to them and their experiences, because all of them, that's one of the criteria, have to have certain engagement already with the SDGs. They have to have a track record of interest in SDGs and gender empowerment and peacemaking. If they can testify that, they will be curated and nominated, and we will hopefully have 2 cohorts of each 20 rolling out this year. We are promoting that, and it's very much a learning exercise for the Ban Ki-moon Center to listen to their experiences. It is their efforts in the region that will hopefully steer further policy decisions even on our side. It is their peer-to-peer exchange. How do we best communicate about this? We definitely will follow the cohorts with video cameras. We'll try to be up there on social media with the results of it. But apart from that, on a more abstract level, I totally agree, good communication is the key. And I think one of the elements that needs to be fostered is communicate on the platforms that the youth is on. Obviously, we're talking Instagram, still Facebook, comme ci, comme ça, Twitter at times, but new platforms will come up, and I'm sure that we have to keep abreast with those to really follow the latest developments. And to say that, Kofi Annan, for example, with his foundation, maybe you have come across his ambassadors, the violent extremism ambassadors that he has gathered, and the message was very clear. We are the generation that is producing most of the violent extremists right now. Like, we are the ones that, unfortunately, our peers are drawing on these means to not only get attention, but to make their voices heard. And so it is our peer responsibility to communicate to them and provide them alternatives. I like the sports programs that have been mentioned. I like that there are efforts in this regard. But it is really our individual responsibility to communicate. And I know about Zuad, for example, here in the audience. She's a great change maker. She's working with youngsters on all levels in various languages, with Caritas, with the Dreikönigsaktion. I know about Noor, who was joining us yesterday, a Syrian refugee, who is doing that with her means of theater plays, of communicating. Rania, another friend of ours, is produced a video of her flight that she experienced from Syria to Austria, and it was a video that you can still watch it on YouTube. It's amazing, and you probably cannot be misunderstanding where refugees come from the moment you have seen Rania's journey, which was awarded, by the way, with various film festival awards. Communication takes place on many levels. Yes, we need to keep open the channels, and yes, we need to talk with the media that are the ones that are received by the youth.
Yes. When the Secretary General visited the Vienna International Center 2 weeks ago, at the end of the event and after the Instagram moment with Greta Thunberg, he came back down and walked down the red carpet. The UN security staff there in their dress uniforms were saluting, and the Secretary General walked down towards his motorcade and his car. And he didn't get into the car with the Director General of the office at Vienna. He didn't get into the car with the then foreign minister. The person who got into the back of the car with him was his social media officer. A young woman based in New York, she's actually Austrian, and she was in the back of the car on the way to the Rathaus for the next event to give him a readout of what was the mood music on social media at that point related to the visit, but more generally related to events, and to check in on what he needed to say or had already put out there, what was the feedback. So that's the Secretary General giving a clear example of listening and then acting on that. And then more broadly, the Secretary General has really led the charge, and that's now something that we're really pushing through in our own department, which is the Department for Global Communications, based in New York. And that is a much stronger emphasis on that two-way traffic with digital communications. Yes, in Instagram, and that's why the Secretary General actually went on to Instagram only at the beginning of May, and hit the ground running, as you might imagine. And then just also finally, just this week, a major report was issued in New York, the Digital Cooperation Report. This was a report that was commissioned, so to speak, by the Secretary General. The two lead personalities, with many others, were Jack Ma and Melissa Gates. And this is a really important piece of work on digital cooperation. Of course, there's a strong youth component in there too. Thank you.
Yes, I would add something also on the social platforms. Of course, the OSCE and the Secretary General are very present on Twitter, on Facebook a little bit less, on LinkedIn also. And maybe this is a pitch for the audience here and the youth in the room. On LinkedIn, our organization is extremely present on the human resource aspect of things. And this is not surprising. Obviously, LinkedIn is more or less for job hunting, as we all know. And apparently, more than 50% of all traffic for our sites is related to job search. And the OSCE is a non-professional organization by nature with a maximum tenure of 10 years, which means that there's a lot of turnover. So in terms of communication, I would say that this is something worth to look at for the youth in the audience. Another issue where we are taking in the information and we are also passing it out to the youth would be our strong academic outreach program, where we have students from universities based in Vienna, but also, or even high schools, it can be, based in Vienna or visiting Vienna, where they can assist the sometimes passionate debates in the Permanent Council. The Permanent Council is where our 57 ambassadors meet on a weekly basis on Thursdays, and where the political issues of the week are discussed. And yes, we have very often quite large groups of students visiting the permanent councils. They take in the information, so it's a good way for us to share as well. And finally, we mentioned Perspective 2030, where we are bringing in youth experts, will prepare analysis, and will be able to share with the broader community after. So that's a way for us to listen and to communicate up to a certain degree, but I would agree with you that we're not doing yet a good job at this. We need to do much better. We're reaching probably 0.1% of the broader, let even the youth population out there. And you would argue that discussing multilateralism, international cooperation doesn't affect us all, but it does in fact. So we need to do better, not only as an OSCE, but I would say as international organizations or regional organizations dedicated to security or SDGs or broader sustainable development goals. We need to do better at passing our message alone. And if we don't, that means that there's generations of young leaders out there that will not be focused on these issues. And when you have international disruptions, let's call it politely, we are not equipped to deal with those necessarily. So.
Thank you, Philippe. Are there more questions from the audience? Yes, please. The mic, please. Would you raise your hand again, please?
think so. My question, thank you first of all for your answers, and my question is a little bit different. I want to go back to the data when you said that in the Southeast Europe there's like a percentage of like 60% of under the age of 30, so that's a lot of youth that lives there. And ironically, the majority of the countries over there share discrepancy between really high educated youth and the youth that doesn't have that much access to education. And as a consequence, these really high educated students, people my age, tend to leave the countries, their home countries, and work abroad somewhere where their knowledge is being valued. So in case where there is a youth group in these governments, what kind of suggestions would you give to the youth groups in these governments so that they can get their fellow people to come back and contribute to their countries? Because I think those countries are losing one of their highest and most important resources, which is these really high educated young people. Thank you.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I started my career, as was mentioned before, in South Korea, and they had a fantastic program rolled out there. I mean, they had evidently, the Confucianism puts a lot of emphasis on education. And so South Korea, I mean, had a high respect for the teachers, for the educational system as such. But it was limited because of the public income, revenue related to the education sector, investment. So you had a lot of them, I mean, going to study in the UK, in the US, further on. And the question in that moment was, how do you get them back? And the South Korean government had a fantastic program laid out. Where using that same Confucianist spirit, had created think tanks, which were, how would you say it, not private sector, not public sector, but something in between, where we could get some of the big brains back from other continents, giving them a salary which was higher than what they could get averagely within the country, so a higher quality of life, but much less than what they eventually could receive if they would have stayed put in the countries where they had studied. But the feeling that they were contributing to the country, and the feeling indeed, I mean, that they had a good quality of life within their own country, was definitely a major asset for many South Koreans to come back and for the success of the industrial development as we witnessed within South Korea. Now, I'm not sure how many countries can afford this, but just let me put it from a different angle, and it relates to the inequality. I mean, yes, we all look at this room. I mean, we're part of the elite. Do you know that on an annual basis, 100,000 millionaires move countries? 100,000 millionaires move countries. I mean, they move countries because of conflict and security, because of tax evasion, you just name it. I mean, multiple reasons. 100,000, and to be precise, it's estimated 108,000. Now, many come from countries which are indeed showing fragility, where indeed you would hope that the talents they depart with would be used within the countries itself. Now, they will never sit in a small boat in the Mediterranean. I mean, they have the golden visa packages, they have all that frameworks. I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, there are too many people who feel totally excluded in what we have today available within this world, that they don't feel that they get a decent part of the big cake which is indeed available. And an element which relates to that is one which we already are very much opposing. It's corruption. We need to have better, transparent, more resilient institutions available. That relates to investigatory media. I mean, to have journalists who are willing indeed to go out to investigate more deeply. I mean, honestly speaking, of the biggest money laundering cases which we have witnessed over the recent decennium, very few have been notified by the regulatory mechanism. Most of them have been put to the forward to the front by investigatory press, media, or by whistleblowers. Tells you a little bit about where we still have a lot of work to do. But as well, in the same token, and something which I would not mention necessarily as such as UNODC, but as for looking on what has to happen, we do say that there is a larger discussion ongoing at this moment with regard to not so much tax evasion, because that's illegal, I mean, that should not happen, but the tax avoidance. I mean, it's a movement within the criminal justice system where people are now looking back again. Is that legal tax system which we have set up over time, is that really helping a fairer world overall? That's still developing, but I would say a fascinating field in which indeed I would say the youngsters would need to take a stake within that. We need to have a more equal world. Last point which I would make in the same direction, and I always use the metaphor of Jonathan Haidt on the mahout sitting on the elephant. I mean, today, the mahout is the elephant driver, is our brain. We are very proud Cartesians. We think that we are mahouts. We're sitting on our elephant, our emotions. Well, the emotions are gone. The elephant is on the road at this moment. How can we try to get the elephant back by showing respect to the elephant and not trying to educate the elephant? That's a mistake which the elite is often making. We need to find another way of communicating and trying indeed to understand this emotional package which is at this moment on the loose, and how we can indeed drive that in a direction which would contribute to a better and more equal society. I mean, rather broad lines, I mean broad principled lines, but of course, I mean a fascinating package altogether.
Of course, I would like to add a comment to how to go about the brain drain, how to go about the best and the brightest, leaving difficult circumstances, seeking opportunities elsewhere. I think in our very mobilized and globalized society, we will not be able to prevent it. It will rather be an exchange. It will be a back and forth. But what I have witnessed as well in my times at the United Nations, but also times in the Foreign Ministry and now with the Ban Ki-moon Center, is that so many people are actually really inspired. They want to give back to their societies. And even if the job opportunity isn't there at the moment, they're waiting for the right point to actually return, because after all, it's their community, it's their family, it's their environment, it's their surrounding. They feel comfortable there. So even the refugee debate oftentimes, or migration debate, doesn't eye at all that many of them would like to return. I was digging up two numbers that probably are interesting in this regard. The global youth unemployment rate currently stands at 13%. And the other number that I want to give you, this is triple as much as the adult unemployment rate is currently on the globe. Youth employment is key. Youth will return to places the moment they have jobs, the moment they have economic opportunity. And I like to challenge audiences and ask, what do you think is the number one nut to crack to create economic opportunity? There is one, and of course nothing is simplistic in this world, but there is one measure that many governments around the globe could undertake to actually create economic opportunity. And it's very simple. It's the involvement of women. Women are yet not half of the working force. They are definitely half of the population of the globe, but they are not entitled to the same rights. So getting women's rights right will actually not only affect climate change, it will affect economic opportunity, it will affect youth unemployment, and it will basically contribute to societies. It is known that women, whatever they earn, they don't necessarily invest on themselves, but they invest back into their families, back into their communities. Women and women empowerment, these are the nuts to crack to actually foster development, economic development, social development in various countries. So therefore, let's fight for it, as ladies and as gentlemen.
More comments from the panel? Yes, please.
Just very briefly, obviously I'd like to echo this point, and more generally about the Sustainable Development Goals. They're all interlinked. Women's empowerment, the goal number 5, of course, is crucial in this regard, but they're all interlinked and can help us to build those resilient and productive societies that would then either encourage young people to return or to stay. But I think you raised a really important point, Monica. Migration is a fact of life. It has been ever since we stood on 2 feet, and will always be there. And it's a positive factor for change as long as it's well managed right the way along the routes that the people take. And just to bring it back to the Vienna-based organizations, of course, UNIDO, just to give one example, the Industrial Development Organization is very much involved in trying to encourage entrepreneurship amongst young people in countries where people may be considering moving. So that's just to give one example.
If you allow me to further that a bit, because it's such an interesting topic, and we have many facets to it. But having worked in Afghanistan and knowing that we have many Afghans, who we welcomed here in Austria, knowing that Afghanistan is one of those countries which has one of the youngest populations as such, and knowing how many people of Afghanistan, educated people, Afghans coming from elite universities, having made a career abroad, came back the moment that the Taliban were defeated, and seeing where the country is standing nowadays, and seeing, how many of those people who came back have moved again back to more secure areas. It's a complicated framework because in economic terms, it's known the more employment, the more youth, the more potential for employment that you have. Logically, the correlation would be that you will have a higher productivity. No, that's not happening. That is not happening at this moment. So again, in very rational Mahout on the elephant times, if you see the declining population in Europe, if you see the declining population in Japan, well, we have all benefit in attracting more people, young people from Africa, wouldn't we? The elephant is saying no. The Cartesian part is saying yes, of course, supply and demand, 1 + 1 is 2. What the heck? But the elephant is saying no. So we really need to look on that and understand as well the emotional part. It's not enough to say we need to have more migration. We need to understand why people saying we don't want to have more migration. We need to understand, the complexity which is based at the base of a lot of work which we're doing within the United Nations system and as well in the Ban Ki-moon Center. One adagium which I learned in Afghanistan, it brings us again somewhat further, so I shouldn't move too much away from where we started, is that, fair enough, poverty is an element. But in Afghanistan, not every poor Afghan farmer cultivated opium, and not every opium farmer was poor. There's vulnerability and there's criminal opportunity. Of course, very much biased for where I come from. That might be clear. But we need to understand that complexity in a manner which goes beyond the easy, yes, 1 + 1 is 2. It's more difficult.
Are there more questions? Maybe a last question. We are coming very close to the end of our... There's one more question.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Tanya. I'm half Austrian, half Lebanese. I live in Beirut in Lebanon. And I just wanted to get an answer from all of you on a recommendation on that. So as some of you know, Lebanon has been through a civil war between 1975 and 1990. And there's a lot of intergenerational happenings behind that. So the youth of Lebanon today are still affected by what their parents have been through. And for example, my father, his sister died in the civil war and so on. So I think I wanted to ask that the issue I'm facing with in Lebanon as a young leader there is the conflict between youth with one another. So there's no one vision with each other that we have. So my question is, what do you recommend for us as young people to have a better dialogue with one another and know what to do together? Because there's a huge division between youth in Lebanon. So that's my question.
Thank you. There was a last question here, please, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much to the panelists. It was really a nice insight and exchange of ideas and thoughts. I would like to, still on the unemployment issue, I would like to ask, well, it's obvious that youths are excluded everywhere, especially in the case of employment. And one of the issues or one of the things that should be tackled is the criteria in which the youth gets employed. So each time when you're filling out this employment survey or profile, you get to see the person should be between 22 to 35 years with 2 years experience, no, 3 years experience, and these experiences should not be more than 2 years, you know? So you have your degrees, which is almost expiring, and you're yet to get the job. So how can you tackle this issue, both in your own organizations, in the civil service and public organizations? That's my question, and thanks again.
Thank you very much. Who wants to answer the question on youth in Lebanon? Yes, please.
Youth in Lebanon. There are many places, unfortunately, like yours, where youth doesn't necessarily sing from one song sheet. Case in point being yesterday at our gathering, Noor, who is, I think, not here today. Is Noor here? Noor from Syria? No. She, for example, I alluded to it before, she wrote a theater piece about how youth groups in Syria are actually conflicting against one another, or even society segments. So that you had the mother with the child, you had the businessman, you had the guerrilla fighter, and you had the governmental fighter, and how much they were divided, even when it came to peace in Syria. And I imagine it was a piece that was performed in front of Ban Ki-moon and Heinz Fischer at Alpbach, and it got great acclaim, and I hope that she continues to communicate in that form. I had one professor at the Diplomatic Academy who said something wise in this regard. How can you unify completely divergent voices? And he said, well, have a project together. And as simple as it might sound, he said, it's true for countries as much as it's true for marriages. The moment you have in a relationship a project together that both are interested in, and the European Union being a case in point. We had a project after the times of war where we were killing brother killed brother, sister killed sister, and we had the project of unifying actually the military resources that Germany and France at that point in time had to a union that then eventually grew to become the European Union. And I know many regions of the world are eyeing to the EU with great not envy, but as a sample of how to do it. And I think in the micro context, it's very much the same as in the macro context. The moment you have a common project, one case in point being there are beautiful orchestras between Israel and Palestine, and I'm sure that the ambassador of Palestine can tell you more about that. Youth orchestras, where youngsters from both sides are playing together in harmony and are performing together. There are water projects from upstream, downstream countries and communities that really work because both upstream and downstream communities are focused on having clean water accessible and not having a feud with the other one. The case in Lebanon, I know from my visits there, you're told don't talk about politics when you are encountering anyone, don't talk religion, but have fun. And probably it takes, in Lebanon, it takes rethinking, and I'm no one to impose that, but let's talk about politics, let's talk about religion and have projects that are sort of palatable to everyone around the table, that are concrete and maybe in the local community.
We're close to the end of our session actually, but I would like to give you the opportunity to answer to both questions. Who wants to take the floor?
I have the floor quite substantially.
Okay. It wasn't that question, but it's to second what you're saying. And at the macro level and the micro level, these confidence-building measures make a difference. Whether it's the crisis in Ukraine or the relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, we can work on small projects that generally can spill over in fostering peace at a broader level. But I won't go any further than that, so I would agree with you. So.
And I think it's the same, the story singing from the same hymn sheet. That Yo-Yo Ma workshop was a great example of how you can work together, and I'm sure that this is, making music together is a fantastic way to overcome divides. I don't think that that's anything particularly new. And sport, we've heard about sport initiatives, so both of them. But again, I think that's probably something you've already thought about. I have to say I'm a little bit stuck on the second question. I don't. So maybe other colleagues have a better answer on that. Yeah.
Let me give that a try. On the first one, we just had an interfaith session at the Crime Commission in which we had a chorus from youngsters Syria, Lebanon, different nations. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful, very touching. The sports of the voice there. I mean, basically, it was a common project from all those groups together. But I guess something which really I've taken with me from my early years was a discussion with the Archbishop of Abuja on Boko Haram. It started really on Boko Haram, on the radicalization, I mean, what was the root cause and so on. And there was one thing which I always will keep with me. I mean, he said, listen, any belief is by nature absolute. I believe, it's absolute. But within that absolute framework, you need to build tolerance. If you don't have that way to open your window, not giving up your own values, you have that absolute belief, but you need to open the window. And that really is something which is very important. Now, opening the window to jobs, I mean, I would suggest don't focus too much on those impossible frameworks. I think there is such a wide range of NGOs, NGOs, international NGOs, private sector nowadays. There's a lot more social responsibility discourse on the market, which is really interesting eventually to look at. I really feel for you, because I see in the UN that we have, Martin, you know, it's absolutely unbelievable, but we have a system where we don't pay our interns. I mean, I don't want to go further on that. I just want to leave the door straight without any problems. But that's not acceptable anymore of these times, and we have tried. I mean, we know that we have tried to change that. I mean, for whatever reason, it's not proven possible. But don't put your eggs in one basket. I mean, look around. I mean, roll it out. There's a broad horizon of elements available.
Thank you very much. I think we come to the end of this session. We got very deep insight into the work of the important organizations based in Vienna and their ideas. Thank you very much, Jean-Luc from the United Nations in Vienna, UNODC, Monique Fröhler from the Ban Ki-moon Center, Martin from UNIS, United Nations in Vienna, and Philip from the OSCE. Thank you very much. I think the most important principal idea, there were so many of them, I would take away from this session is listen first, try to understand, include, create, and fill the space. I think that is the message we want to get across. Thank you very much.
Thank you.